The old mining station floated at the edge of a nameless system. Its engines groaned, its walls carried rust, and its workers were tired men and women who lived day after day with dirt on their hands and smoke in their lungs. No one came here for glory. They came because they had no other place to go. Paul was the foreman. His hands were thick from years of lifting steel pipes and hammering stone, his voice steady when others lost patience, and his face worn from the sun of many worlds. He was not the smartest man in the company, nor the most ambitious, but he was steady. When something broke, Paul fixed it. When someone panicked, Paul calmed them. In the small circle of tired workers, he was the one they leaned on. On a gray morning, the scanners caught something unusual. It was a structure buried beneath the rock far below the usual mining layers. The machines marked it as hollow, full of strange readings. Some thought it was a cavern. Others said it was an old alien ruin. The company sent orders at once. They wanted the place opened and its contents reported. The crew worked with drills and cutters, grinding through hard stone until sparks filled the air. Hours passed, then days. At last, the stone wall gave way and a chamber opened before them. The air inside was cold and heavy, untouched for ages. The workers stepped in with lights in hand. Their boots echoed against smooth floors too perfect to be natural. The walls curved like glass and strange symbols glowed faintly in the dark. The others whispered in awe. Some laughed nervously. The company had told them to keep working, but ruins like this often held treasures. Treasures meant credits. Credits meant escape from the endless dust of mining life. Everyone looked for something they could claim as their own. But Paul was not looking for wealth. He was looking for danger. Ruins were not always safe. Old machines sometimes carried power, and traps were not uncommon. He kept his lamp steady and his eyes sharp as he walked deeper into the chamber. At the very center stood something strange. It was not a machine, nor was it a statue. It was a crystal cocoon tall as a person and wide as two. Inside it, something moved. The others froze when their lamps caught the shape. It was a figure, a woman, but not human. She had wings folded behind her back, wings pressed tight and sealed in thick layers that looked like hardened amber. Her face was calm, though her eyes were shut. Her skin glimmered faintly as if touched by starlight. She looked alive but trapped, as though time itself had locked her away. The workers muttered among themselves. Some called it treasure. Others said it was cursed. One man spit on the ground and said they should break the cocoon open, take whatever was inside and sell it. Paul stepped forward before anyone else could act. He pressed his palm against the crystal. It was cold, colder than ice. For a moment he thought he felt a heartbeat within, faint and slow. He pulled back, uncertain. "This is no treasure," he said firmly. "This is someone." The crew laughed at him. "It's a fossil," one said. "It's worth more broken than whole," said another. But Paul shook his head. He had seen death before, and this was not death. He had buried friends in the mines, men crushed under stone, and he knew the look of lifeless flesh. The figure inside was not lifeless. It was only sleeping. When the report was sent to the company, the answer came fast. The company did not care if the figure was alive or not. They only cared about profit. They ordered the miners to cut it free and prepare it for transport. Paul read the message and felt something heavy in his chest. He had followed orders his whole life. He had worked where they told him, slept when they allowed it, and carried the burden of others without complaint. But this order did not feel right. Something about the winged figure drew him. Something about the way her wings were bound and sealed in the amber felt cruel. When night fell and the other miners returned to their bunks, Paul stayed in the chamber. His lamp glowed softly against the crystal. He pulled a cloth from his pocket and began to wipe the surface, clearing away dust that had gathered for ages. He did not know why he did it. Perhaps he thought she deserved to be seen clearly, not hidden under dirt. Perhaps he thought it was the least he could offer. As he worked, he spoke softly. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know how long you've been here, but you're not alone anymore." The chamber was silent, but in his heart, Paul felt as if the figure was listening. The next day, the company sent machines to cut the cocoon loose. Sparks flew as blades screeched against the hardened shell, but the machines broke one after another. No blade could pierce the crystal, no torch could melt it. The workers cursed, but Paul felt a strange sense of relief. Whatever prison held her was strong enough to resist greed. Still, the company would not give up. They ordered the miners to keep trying no matter how long it took. Paul obeyed outwardly, but in secret he continued his quiet cleaning. Every night, while others slept, he brushed away more dust. He traced the lines of her wings, sealed so tightly they looked painful. He wondered what crime had put her in such a cage. On the fourth night, something happened. As Paul cleaned near her face, her eyes flickered. They opened only a sliver, but it was enough. He saw them. They were not the eyes of a statue. They were alive, deep and filled with sorrow. Paul froze, his breath caught in his throat. He dropped the cloth and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the eyes closed again, as if the effort had been too much. The next day, Paul told no one. The others would only mock him or, worse, harm her. Instead, he carried water in a small flask, and at night, he pressed drops against a tiny crack near her lips. He did not know if it helped, but it felt right. The workers still treated the cocoon as a thing. They spoke of cutting it apart, of shipping it to the company, of the credits they would earn. But Paul no longer saw a cocoon. He saw a prisoner, a forgotten guardian, a soul caught in the grip of time. And deep inside, Paul made a decision. If she ever truly woke, if she ever broke free, he would not let the company take her. He would stand in their way, even if it cost him everything. The mining station ran on noise and dust. Day after day, drills chewed through stone, sparks rained down like metal snow, and tired workers shouted over the roar of engines. Yet in the heart of the strange chamber, Paul moved with quiet care. While others hammered rock, he wiped dust from a crystal prison that none of their tools could cut. The figure inside remained still, but Paul no longer believed she was only a figure. He had seen her eyes open once, faint but real. That single glance had been enough to change him. He returned each night, his lamp the only light, his rough hands moving slowly, cleaning away layers of grime as if revealing her to the world again. One evening, when the air outside was filled with storms of dust and the crew had sealed themselves in their quarters, Paul stayed in the chamber longer than usual. He had brought a small flask of water hidden in his coat. Carefully, he poured a few drops onto the edge of the crystal, where her lips touched the surface. The liquid slid down the side, leaving a faint trail. He did not expect anything. He only hoped. Then it happened. A sound like a sigh escaped from the crystal. Paul froze, every hair on his arm standing on end. The figure's lips parted slightly and her throat moved as though she swallowed the water. Her eyelids trembled, then slowly opened. Paul's breath caught. She was awake, her eyes were strange yet beautiful. They were not human, shaped more like the wings of a bird than round orbs. They glowed faintly in the lamplight, carrying a sorrow deeper than words. She looked directly at him, and Paul felt his chest tighten. This was no fossil, no statue. This was a living being trapped in suffering. For a long moment, they only looked at each other. Paul felt awkward, as though he had intruded into something sacred. At last he cleared his throat and whispered, "You're safe. I'll help you." The figure tried to speak, but only a broken sound came out, dry and faint. She lifted a hand against the inner wall of the crystal. Her fingers were long and graceful, tipped with faint silver marks that glimmered like veins of light. She pressed them weakly against the barrier, leaving a faint mark where her skin touched. Without thinking, Paul raised his own hand and pressed it against hers from the outside. Warmth met cold. For a heartbeat, he felt as if the wall between them was thinner than it looked. The connection lasted only a moment before her strength faded. Her hand slipped down, her eyes half closed. But Paul understood the message. She was alive and she wanted help. The next morning, Paul went to work as usual. The other miners joked about selling the cocoon to collectors or melting it down for rare materials. They had no idea that the figure inside was awake. Paul kept silent. He had learned long ago that the company did not care about lives, only profit. If they knew she was alive, they would move faster to seize her. That night, Paul returned with more water. He poured it carefully, drop by drop, near her lips. Again she stirred. Her eyes opened wider this time, and she managed to form a faint sound. It was not a human word, but Paul could hear intention in it, a plea, fragile yet strong. He knelt beside the crystal and spoke softly. "I don't understand your words, but I hear you. You're not alone anymore." She watched him as if searching his face for truth. Then she blinked slowly, and Paul took it as trust. In the days that followed, Paul's secret visits continued. He cleaned more of the crystal, revealing her folded wings pressed tightly against her back. They were large, even larger than her body, but bound so hard they looked painful. Cracks ran through the amber-like shell, sealing them shut. Paul winced each time he brushed his cloth over them. Whoever had trapped her had not meant for her to escape. When Paul worked near her wings, her eyes would follow his movements. Sometimes she winced as though remembering pain. Paul would stop and whisper gently, "I'll be careful. I promise." One evening she tried to speak again. Her voice was still broken, like dry leaves in the wind, but a single word formed. Though not in any language Paul knew, she touched her chest with her hand, then repeated the sound. Paul realized she was telling him her name. He tried to repeat it, stumbling over the alien shape of the word. To his surprise, her lips curved faintly, almost like a smile. "All right," Paul said softly. "I'll call you that." He tapped his chest. "Paul." She watched him and then gave a slow nod as if accepting the exchange. The bond between them grew in silence and small gestures. When Paul spoke, she listened. When she touched the crystal, he answered with patience. Though no words connected them, understanding slowly bloomed. But the danger outside grew. The company sent inspectors who demanded progress. They asked why the crystal had not been cut free. The miners showed broken tools and burned out lasers. The inspectors cursed and sent orders for stronger machines. Paul stood quietly in the background, his heart heavy. Each order brought the company closer to discovering the truth. If they knew she was alive, they would treat her like property, not a person. That night, Paul sat beside the crystal and whispered, "They will not stop. They want to take you away. I don't know how yet, but I'll protect you." Her eyes softened at his words. She raised her hand again, pressing it weakly to the barrier. Paul pressed his own against hers. For a brief moment, he felt warmth pass through, faint but real. The days dragged on. Work continued above, drills chewing into rock. But Paul's thoughts were always here, in the chamber. His fellow miners noticed he was quieter, more distant. Some teased him for staring at the statue. Paul shrugged off their words. He did not need them to understand. On the 7th night of his secret visit, something changed. When he poured water against the crystal, she reached out with more strength than before. Her hand pressed harder against the barrier, her eyes burning with urgency. She made a sound again, clearer this time, though still in her own language. Paul leaned close, listening. He could not understand the meaning, but he felt the plea. Her wings trembled faintly, straining against their bonds. Cracks in the amber shell deepened. For the first time, Paul dared to hope she might break free. But hope carried fear. If she broke free too soon, while the company still watched closely, they would come for her at once. Paul sat back, torn between joy and worry. He whispered, "Not yet. Please, not yet. I need time to keep you safe." Her eyes softened again and she stilled her wings. It was as if she understood his caution. Paul rested his head against the crystal, closing his eyes. He was only a miner, a foreman with no power against a giant company. Yet in that moment, with her hand against his, he felt stronger than ever before. He had made a silent promise. He would not abandon her, no matter what came next. And somewhere deep within the sealed chamber, time itself seemed to stir, as if the universe was listening to the quiet bond between one human foreman and a forgotten winged prisoner. The chamber grew warmer with every passing night. The air no longer smelled only of dust and stone, but carried a faint sweetness that Paul could not explain. He thought it came from the crystal itself, as if the being inside was slowly waking and changing the very air around her. Paul continued his secret visits. Every evening when the miners had returned to their bunks and the halls were quiet, he carried his lamp and water flask to the chamber. He cleaned the crystal with patient hands, brushing dust from her face and wings. The figure inside responded more now. Her eyes opened longer. Her fingers moved against the wall with purpose. She even tried to form sounds, though they were broken and strange to Paul's ears. On one such night, Paul brought not only water but a small tool. It was no drill or cutter, only a soft chisel meant for scraping delicate stone. He pressed it against the amber-like layer near her wings and gently tapped. The shell gave a faint crack. He stopped at once, afraid of harming her. She looked at him with wide eyes but did not seem afraid. Instead, she gave a faint nod, encouraging him. Still, Paul worked with caution. He tapped only enough to loosen dust and scrape away thin layers that covered the surface. Each small break revealed more detail of her wings. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. The feathers were long and curved, layered like blades of silver and light. Even bound and trapped, they carried a strange power. One night after he had cleared much of the dust, the figure pressed her hand against the crystal and whispered a sound again. This time it was clearer. Paul leaned closer. She touched her chest, then her wings, then closed her eyes as though remembering. Paul watched her carefully. Slowly, he began to understand that she was not only showing him her name but also her story. He tapped his chest with his hand. "Paul," he said, reminding her of his name. She nodded faintly, then repeated the gesture, tapping her own chest and whispering her name again. The sound was sharp yet soft, carrying a melody no human word could match. Paul tried to repeat it but stumbled as before. Her lips curved in the faint shadow of a smile. Then she touched her wings, her eyes filling with sorrow. She pressed her hands together tightly as if to show how they were sealed, then shook her head with pain. Paul leaned closer, watching. She pointed upward toward the ceiling of the chamber, then swept her hand as if describing the sky. Paul imagined her flying there once, high above a world, free and strong. Her wings twitched faintly inside the crystal, bound so hard they could not open. Cracks in the amber shell deepened with her movement. She winced, then stopped, her body trembling. Paul's chest ached at the sight. He whispered, "They trapped you. They took your sky." She looked at him with wide eyes, as if surprised that he understood even a piece of her story. Then she nodded slowly. That night Paul could not sleep. He lay awake in his bunk, the storm outside shaking the walls of the mining station, but his mind replayed the image of her wings pressed tight. Who had done this to her? Why had she been left here for so long? The next evening, Paul returned with something different. He brought a small pad of paper and a piece of charcoal. When he sat in front of the crystal, he began to draw. His rough fingers were not skilled in art, but he shaped the image of wings wide and open. He held it up to her. Her eyes widened and she pressed her hand against the crystal. She nodded, tears shining faintly at the edges of her eyes. Then she made her own gesture, tracing shapes in the air with her finger. Paul tried to copy them on paper. At first the marks meant nothing, but as she repeated them, Paul realized they were symbols of her people, their writing. Night after night they built a language together. She traced marks and Paul copied them. She pointed to her wings, her eyes, her heart, and gave him sounds. Slowly Paul gathered enough pieces to understand. Her story was one of pain. Long ago she had been a guardian, a protector of her people. Her wings had carried her high above their cities, and her voice had been one of command. But then another force had come, enemies who feared her strength. They had bound her wings with chains not of metal but of time itself, sealing her in crystal so that she could never fly again. Her people had tried to fight but were driven into silence. She had been left here a prisoner while ages passed and her world faded away. As she shared these fragments, Paul felt anger burn inside him. He had lived a hard life, but he had never known a cruelty like this. To take away the very thing that defined her, to trap her in silence for ages, was worse than death. Yet even in sorrow there was hope. Each night her strength grew. The cracks in the crystal deepened, her wings shifting more each time Paul cleaned away the dust. She could not yet break free, but she was no longer helpless. Paul spoke to her often, even when she could not answer. He told her about Earth, about oceans and mountains, about cities filled with light. He told her about the mines, about the tired workers who dreamed of freedom but stayed for pay. He told her about himself, about a childhood spent under heavy skies, about the weight of being a man others relied on. She listened with quiet eyes. Sometimes she placed her hand against the crystal while he spoke, as if to say she understood. But danger grew close. The company grew impatient. They sent another message demanding results. They threatened to cut pay if progress was not made. The miners grumbled in anger, but Paul felt only fear. If they brought stronger machines, they might learn the truth. That night, Paul sat against the crystal, his back aching from work, his heart heavy. "I don't know how long I can keep you safe," he whispered. "But I'll try. I'll fight if I have to." She watched him silently, her eyes bright with a strange light. Then she did something she had never done before. She raised her hand and pressed her palm against the crystal. The glow of her veins spread faintly through the wall, and Paul felt warmth beneath his hand. It was not only a touch, it was trust. Paul closed his eyes and pressed harder. In that moment he felt the bond between them grow stronger, like an unspoken promise. When he pulled back, she was still watching him. Her lips moved slowly and she formed a new sound. It was soft but clear, the first word he truly understood. "Friend," she said. Paul's chest tightened. He nodded firmly, his voice steady. Yes, friend. The chamber fell into silence, but it was no longer the silence of a prison. It was the silence of trust, the silence before change. And deep within the cracks of the crystal, her wings trembled again, stronger this time, as though waiting for the day they would open wide once more. The mining station was never quiet for long. Machines roared day and night, chewing stone and spitting dust, while workers shouted to be heard over the noise. But the loudest voice now came not from drills but from the company itself. A new message arrived, this one sharp and cold. It demanded results. The company wanted the crystal cut free, no excuses. If the miners failed again, they would send inspectors with soldiers. Soldiers meant no more secrets, no more chances. Paul read the message with a heavy heart. His crew gathered around him, muttering curses. Most of them were too tired to care, but some were angry enough to spit on the floor. The company had always been greedy, but this order was worse than usual. They want us to break our backs for nothing, one worker grumbled. If the crystal's so important, let them come cut it themselves. Paul kept his thoughts to himself. He knew what the others did not. The crystal did not hold treasure or relics. It held a life that had begun to wake, to trust him. That night, Paul went again to the chamber. His lamp lit the smooth walls, his boots echoing on the floor. Inside the crystal, the winged woman stirred. Her eyes opened as he approached, her hand lifting weakly to greet him. Paul pressed his palm against hers. He whispered, "They are coming. They will try to take you." Her eyes darkened with fear, then steadied with something stronger. She spread her wings slightly, straining against the amber bonds. Cracks spread across the crystal, glowing faintly. The sight filled Paul with both hope and worry. She was close to breaking free, but if she did it too soon, the company would see. Paul spoke again, his voice steady. "Wait a little longer. Let me prepare." She nodded faintly, though it was clear her strength was building each day. The next morning, the inspectors arrived. A shuttle landed outside the station, its engines shaking the metal floors. Out stepped men in dark uniforms with polished boots. Their eyes scanned the miners with disdain, as though judging cattle. At their side stood armed guards with rifles slung across their shoulders. The miners grumbled but kept working. Paul greeted the inspectors with calm respect, though his jaw was tight. They demanded to see the chamber. Paul led them down, his heart pounding. The moment the inspectors laid eyes on the crystal, their expressions changed. Greed lit their faces. One reached out to touch the surface, his voice sharp. "This will make the company rich beyond measure. Prepare it for transport at once." Paul forced his voice to remain steady. "Our tools cannot cut it. We've tried every method. The shell resists everything." The inspector sneered. "Then bring stronger tools. Burn it if you must. The company owns everything here, and that includes this prize." The word struck Paul like a hammer. Prize. That was all they saw. Not life, not pain, not trust. Only profit. When the inspectors left, Paul's crew gathered around him. Some were eager. They whispered of riches, promotions, rewards for delivering the crystal. Others were uneasy. They had worked under Paul long enough to trust his instincts. One worker asked quietly, "Foreman, what do you think it is? Why guard it so close?" Paul looked at them, weighing his words. At last he said, "It is not what the company believes. It is not treasure. It is someone. Alive." The crew froze. Murmurs rippled through them. Some laughed nervously, thinking he joked. Others paled, realizing he was serious. "Alive?" one whispered. "You mean a creature?" Paul shook his head. "Not a creature. A person. Trapped. She has eyes that see and hands that move. She is not ours to sell." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Some shook their heads, unwilling to believe. Others lowered their voices, torn between fear and awe. Paul raised his voice firmly. "Listen to me. If the company takes her, they will use her. They will break her. We cannot allow that." Silence followed. Then one man spat on the floor. "Not my problem. I came here to earn credits, not to play hero." He walked away. Others followed him. But a few remained, their eyes meeting Paul's with quiet resolve. That night, Paul returned to the chamber. He knelt before the crystal and whispered, "Some of them stand with me. Some will not. But I will not let them take you." Her hand pressed against his once more. Her wings trembled, cracks spreading wider. This time, Paul did not stop her. He nodded. "Soon, when the time is right, break free." The days that followed were tense. The inspectors ordered machines brought down, great cutters and plasma torches meant to slice through anything. Sparks filled the chamber as they tried to carve the crystal loose, but each attempt failed. Blades shattered. Torches sputtered out. The crystal remained whole. The inspectors grew furious. They shouted at the miners, accusing them of sabotage. Guards patrolled the halls with weapons ready. Fear spread among the workers, but Paul stood tall. One evening, when the machines had gone silent and the inspectors returned to their shuttle, Paul gathered the few miners who trusted him. He told them everything he had seen. He told them about her eyes, her voice, her story scratched in symbols on paper. He told them about her wings and the cruelty that had bound them. By the time he finished, their faces were pale, but their hearts were moved. One man said, "If what you say is true, then she is not a prize. She is a prisoner, and no one deserves chains." Another nodded. "We will stand with you, Foreman." The small group made their plan. They would protect the chamber. They would delay the inspectors as long as possible. And when the time came, they would help her escape. The next day, tension erupted. The inspectors returned with soldiers, ordering the miners to step aside. They brought a massive drill, one that hummed with power. Sparks lit the chamber as its head spun, ready to pierce the crystal. Paul stepped forward, raising his hand. "Stop, you cannot do this," the lead inspector sneered. "Out of the way, Foreman. This does not belong to you." Paul's voice was calm but firm. "It does not belong to you either. It is not a thing. It is a life." The inspector's face darkened. He motioned to the guards. "Remove him." Soldiers advanced, rifles raised. The miners who stood with Paul moved forward too, forming a wall between the crystal and the machines. Their faces were grim, but their resolve was clear. The chamber filled with shouts. Soldiers barked orders. Miners stood firm. Paul's heart pounded as he stared down the rifles, but he did not move. Behind him, he felt the faint tremor of wings pressing harder against the crystal. Then, with a sound like thunder, the shell cracked wide. All eyes turned as light burst from the crystal. The amber bonds split apart, shards flying across the chamber. The figure within spread her wings, at last free. She rose slowly, her feathers glowing with strength and sorrow, her eyes burning with a fire that had waited for centuries. The soldiers froze, their weapons shaking. The inspectors stumbled back, their greed replaced by fear. Paul turned to her, his voice steady. "You are free." Her gaze met his. For a moment, all noise fell away. Then she beat her wings once, and the wind knocked soldiers to the ground. The chamber shook as dust and light filled the air. The conflict had begun. The chamber trembled with every beat of her wings. Light spilled across the walls, reflecting off shattered shards of crystal like fragments of stars. Dust swirled in the air, catching in her silver feathers, but she did not falter. For the first time in centuries, she was free. Paul stood at the center of the chamber, his hands raised to protect himself from flying debris. His chest pounded not from fear but from awe. He had seen machines fail, inspectors shout, and soldiers advance, but nothing compared to the sight of her wings spreading wide in freedom. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the noise of the station disappeared. He could see the years of sorrow, the centuries of waiting, and the immense gratitude shining in her gaze. Though she could not speak in words, he fully understood. Her eyes said everything. "You are safe now," Paul whispered, his voice strong despite the chaos. She responded with a soft, melodic sound. Paul had learned enough of her language to recognize the tone. It was a word of thanks, pure and simple. She lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted her wings again, testing their strength. The movement stirred the air, knocking over loose tools and sending sparks from broken machines flying in all directions. Outside, alarms from the mining station echoed as the inspectors and guards scrambled to regain control. They had expected a fragile crystal, a prize they could cut and transport, not a living being with wings wide as the chamber itself. Many backed away, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Paul did not flinch. He stepped closer to her, his hands raised in calm. "I will protect you," he said firmly. She seemed to understand. She tilted her head, brushing a soft wing against his shoulder. The touch was feather-light, yet it carried a strength that made him shiver. He felt the bond between them more clearly than ever. Her wings were not just for flight. They were a statement of power and freedom. The inspectors barked orders, but the soldiers hesitated. No one wanted to get close to the creature whose wings could knock men off their feet. The miners who had stood with Paul formed a human shield behind him. Together they blocked the path to the chamber's exit. With a deep breath, Paul addressed the figure in the crystal for the first time with words he hoped she would understand. If you can fly, go to the sky where you belong. Nothing here has the right to keep you bound. Her wings shivered, then beat once, twice. The sound was deafening, yet it carried a grace that filled the chamber. Dust and light danced together as she rose slightly from the ground. Paul could see the strength returning to her muscles, the power in every feather, the fire in her eyes that had been dimmed by years of imprisonment. The guards and inspectors tried to approach, but a single sweep of her wings sent them sprawling. They scrambled to stay on their feet as debris scattered around the chamber. Machines toppled, sparks flew like fireflies, and the ceiling trembled with her strength. Paul did not move. He knew that fear would not serve them here. Only trust could guide the moment. He raised his hands toward her wings, a silent encouragement. She paused, hovering in the air, her gaze fixed on him. Her body stretched, wings fully extended, and for the first time she moved freely, unhindered by crystal or chains. Her flight was graceful yet strong, each beat of her wings powerful enough to stir the air into windstorms inside the chamber. Then slowly, she rose higher. The chamber walls no longer constrained her. She moved toward the open ceiling, lifting higher and higher. The miners and Paul watched, mouths open in awe. Dust fell like rain around them, and light from her wings painted the room with shades of silver and blue. Paul felt a strange warmth in his chest. This was what he had fought for. Not credit, not glory, not wealth, but freedom. She had waited centuries for this moment, and humanity, through one man's hands and courage, had helped her reclaim it. The inspectors shouted, trying to call soldiers forward, but no one dared to step close. The winged woman's flight was untouchable. Her presence commanded respect and awe, proving that life could never be caged by greed or fear. Finally, she reached the opening at the top of the chamber. The cold wind of the night outside welcomed her. She paused, stretching her wings fully in the starlight, her body glowing faintly as if illuminated by the sky itself. She glanced downward, meeting Paul's eyes one last time. In that moment, he saw something that made every hardship worthwhile: gratitude, trust, and the acknowledgement of a bond forged in care and courage. Then, with a final beat of her wings, she lifted higher, leaving the station behind. The wind rushed past Paul's face, carrying the faint sound of her wings cutting through the air. He closed his eyes and let out a breath he had been holding for weeks, months, perhaps years. Around him, the miners cheered quietly. Some were relieved. Others were still in awe. But all of them understood. Humanity had proven itself in small but important ways. It was not through machines, wealth, or power that humans showed their worth, but through compassion, patience, and courage. Paul remained in the chamber long after her flight. He touched the empty space where her crystal had been, where her wings had pressed against the walls, and he felt a strange emptiness, a hollow that only came from witnessing greatness leave. But it was not sadness. It was pride. He had played a part in something extraordinary, something that reminded him why he had chosen to act with care when others had chosen profit. Days passed. The inspectors returned, angry and frustrated, but the miners remained silent. No one betrayed the secret of her freedom. The winged woman was gone, but the story of what had happened in that chamber spread among the crew. They spoke quietly in awe about a being freed by a human foreman's hands, a story that would remind them why courage and kindness mattered. Paul spent hours looking at the sky. At night, when the stars shone bright and the wind whispered through the station, he imagined her flying above distant worlds. He pictured her spreading her wings across alien skies, free from fear, free from chains, free from time itself. He could almost hear the faint beat of her wings, calling across the void, a reminder that life, even after long suffering, could rise again. In the weeks that followed, the mining station returned to routine. Machines roared, dust fell, and workers moved through their days. But there was a difference now. In quiet moments, when Paul walked the halls or inspected machinery, he felt a connection to something greater. He had touched a life that had endured centuries, and in doing so, he had helped it reclaim its sky. The winged woman did not return, and she did not need to. Her freedom was complete. Humanity had left its mark not in steel or stone, but in hands that had chosen care over cruelty, patience over greed, and courage over fear. Paul smiled faintly as he looked toward the horizon. Somewhere out there she soared, and somewhere in the wind that brushed against his face, He felt her presence, a living reminder that when humanity chose to rise, it could touch the stars in ways far beyond power or conquest. For the first time in the long, weary life of the mining station, hope felt real. And in that hope, Paul understood that freedom was not only a gift to those who had been bound, but also a reflection of what humans could achieve when they acted with true heart and purpose. The world continued. Machines hummed and life moved forward. Yet one night, when the wind carried the scent of distant lands and strange flowers from far planets, Paul imagined the silver wings stretching across the sky, and he knew that humanity had been part of something extraordinary, and for him that was enough.